Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Today we're going to be stitching out our third design into our beautiful house block. I love these blocks because they were pretty intense to piece, a lot of different pieces, and we're trying to kind of balance that with quilting, add more texture and more design with the quilting. So today we're going to be tackling all sorts of wiggles. So let me show you what this design's going to look like. So here's the all sorts of wiggles design. We've got some wiggly U-shapes in the roof, and then we've got these jagged teeth that are straight lines and sharp angles, and then the best wiggles of all, stippling. This is stippling on a 1/4 inch scale here in the background. The one thing about this block, I did not mark the stippling because this is pretty dense and it's kind of hard to mark that. But everything else I did mark, and just in case you're looking for this graph so that you can mark your block too, you can find it in the Building Blocks quilt pattern available at leahday.com. So I have marked the house, I have marked this design down here on the ground section. I have not marked the stippling. I'm going to freehand quilt that. And to prep the block, I have stitched in the ditch around this rectangle and come up around the roof and around that little chimney and down around the roof. So I'm actually I did that the opposite. I went around the box, came up and around, and I'm right here, and that's where I'm going to get started knocking out these teeth first. So let's get on the machine and see how this works in free motion. So here we are on the block, and I'm going to get started with these teeth that really kind of butt off right against the edge of the house. So what I'm doing is just simply travel stitching down in that ditch. I've stitched it in the ditch, and now I'm using that line to travel against, travel right on top of, and then I come in with that little rectangle. Now if you really want to get exacting and you're having trouble staying in that ditch, just rotate your block and slow down as you stitch the ditches. Then you can swing inside and it's a little quicker. It's a little bit more accurate if you rotate, but you know, of course it's one of those things you might really want to learn how to do this without any rotation at all. However, you do need to watch your machine. If your machine starts making some funny stitches, it might not like the direction you're going in, and in that case you really have to rotate. So now I'm just travel stitching down and I'm ready to hit this next line, and here I'm just gonna wiggle back and forth and get to this window and go in and ditch my window. I think of anything with this block, the window is the thing that has kind of caused some issues, just simply because we were not stitching in the ditch the lines. These are piecing lines here. We're not stitching in the ditch through those. We're instead using the filler design to get us to that window. So that way it looks really nice on the front and really nice on the back. So now I'm carefully stitching in the ditch all around this shape. And I do feel like, you know, when you're in a situation like this and you're really trying to do careful stitching, rotating the piece around really does help. But let me give you a little cheat. I'm going to add just something kind of fun to this block. I think that this will add a little bit more texture to it and make it look prettier. Here's what happens. Let's say you stitch off and your windows, you know, it's just kind of, you've got some lines of quilting that are just not right. Well, here you can add a few drapes. Just add a little curve right there from corner to corner, if you want to do 2 of those. Now we've got a little, you know, little drape right there. Now I'm going to travel stitch and do the same thing on the opposite side. That might be a nice way, if you've stitched off and you want to kind of hide it, that might be something that you might want to try. So now I'm travel stitching back. I just think that looks kind of pretty. I like to add little things like that to my quilts. Okay, now I'm back to my teeth, the straight lines and sharp angles. And one thing, as you're flowing through this, you know, I'm able to stitch straight line, straight line, straight line, and still have crisp corners. How am I able to do that? Well, the main reason is I don't, when I make that direction change, it's a definite direct direction change. I don't curve it around. I also don't stay right on the corner and stitch in place. I really try and stitch it and get off of it. One thing you might also notice is I slow down slightly. When I reach a corner, I let off the gas. I take my foot slightly off the foot pedal, and that helps me slow down. Okay, now this is just some careful stitching as I come around, hit that line, pop out for that little kind of box. These kind of remind me of bricks. If I say the word brick, that's what this is reminding me of. It's reminding me of the bricks of a house. There, that's looking good. Okay, so to keep on going, you know, the only one that's complete, we have a full set of complete lines, and this is basically running from edge to edge, and then we have another one here right against the door. The steps are simple. Simply go follow that line and try to make, as you create these angles, try to make those direction changes, you know, come to that point, change direction. It's a lot to think about. So if this is a struggle for you and you're finding that you're curving those corners rather than stitching nice 90-degree angles, come up to the corner and stop with your needle in the down position, take your foot off the foot pedal, think about it for a little while, and start stitching again, and that can sometimes help. Another possibility is just to turn it into curves. If you can't stitch the straight lines and sharp angles, well, just turn it into more wiggly U-shapes, and that's perfectly fine. So there we go. Those lines are now filled. One thing you'll notice, I changed the design a little bit. When I marked this out, I had these lines end up right in these stitches, and I didn't really like that look. Those lines of quilting might have ended up really kind of tucked down in those seam allowances in the open seams, and I didn't really like that. So instead I just simply stitched them a little distance away from those seam lines, and I liked it better. So understand, you can change this up, and if you want to avoid stitching in the ditch, you can at any time. Okay, so I'm up here ready to knock out these wiggly U-shapes, and these wiggly U-shapes are really great practice and kind of prep for stitching the stippling. So you're going to swing down, kind of flowing up and down. We've dealt with a lot of seam allowances, some issues from the bulk, and because of stippling, the wonderful nature of stippling, we can kind of avoid some of those areas that have been tricky in the previous quilting designs. We can actually avoid those areas with stippling because it's so flowy and wiggly. We can make this design fit and fill exactly how we want to. And this is a great example of that. This area right here is really dense. There's a lot of layers of fabric, so I'm slowing down. I'm going to take one stitch at a time as I reach that corner, and that really helps you maintain some control. Okay, I think I'm going to stitch just a little bit of stippling down here, and then I can knock out more wiggly U-shapes. So I'm going to stitch this as a row of stippling on a 1/4 inch scale. So I'm thinking about, okay, what is a 1/4 inch? Maybe about that width is what I'm thinking about. If you wanted to stitch it on a different scale, you can. So I even might get started with some wiggly U-shapes on that scale, and then start adding some bends and extra wiggles so that it looks more random. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch beyond my outer perimeter line, because I like to do that. It just simply, you know, I think it makes it look a little bit more like a consistent texture. I will end up cutting that off in the end, and it's a-okay to do that. It's a-okay to cut your quilting stitches, because we're going to be binding these blocks together in a very secure way, so those stitches will not be coming out. So that's okay. So here I'm finishing up, and I'm going to hit that corner, and now we can knock out these little wiggly U-shapes. So I marked these, even though they're very simple to stitch and you could easily freehand quilt them. I marked them mostly because I wanted exactly that shape, exactly that design in that space. I wanted exactly that number of wiggly U's. so it was nice to mark it. Another idea, if you wanted to stitch the block and change it up a little bit, just like we did that window, is that you could use this row of wiggly U-shapes kind of as a base, or we could call it a foundation, and you could run more lines of quilting through this area, simply echoing this line. And that might be something that you want to try too. If you wanted to stitch maybe on a slightly smaller scale, all you would do is simply add, come in here and echo, stitch another line of quilting within this area, and I would do it on both sides. I think that would look really pretty. What I call that, when you do that, when you stitch these wiggly U-shapes and then you echo on both sides of it, I call that river path. It's another whole design. So it might be something you want to play with. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to stippling on that 1/4" scale. Okay, I want to zoom in here, right here at the end, and show you 2 places that I messed up. And I want to point this out just to show you, you know, this happens, I'm not going to rip it. The first one happened here. If you notice that that's the area of a lot of seams coming together, that's an area of intense piecing, there's lots of seam allowances. I was trying to stitch in the area and just fill in a little extra space, and the seam allowances kind of forced my foot forward, and I ended up closer to my stitches than I would have liked. I just said, leave it, Leah, and get out of there, and I hurried out of there really quick. But then the exact same thing happened again. I got too close here, kind of got hung up, and then had to kind of push it. My hands were pushing a little fast, and stitched 2 big stitches here. They look a little awkward, but again, this happens. Don't nitpick it. I saw it. I decided to point it out to you. But I'm sure if you back it up, can you really see it in the whole pretty expanse of stippling on the block? No, you can't. You have to really be looking for it. So I hope that you will stitch this and do the same thing. If you see issues, if you see mistakes, they happen. Keep stitching. You'll find that consistency eventually. But if you pick up your seam ripper, you're really going to be wasting a lot of time, not gaining any skill quilting. So that's it for this video on all sorts of wiggles in one of our house blocks. These house blocks, you know, are pretty intense as far as the quilting goes. I've added quite a lot of quilting to these blocks. And the reason is I just love the piecing of these blocks, and I wanted the quilting to be at the same level as the piecing. I wanted the quilting to really accent the piecing and to make it stand out. Now, if this is too dense for you, or you didn't like some aspect of the design, I really encourage you to change it. If you freehand quilt your stippling, you can choose whatever scale you want to stitch it on. If you want to stitch it on a 1/2" scale, make those lines of quilting wider apart. Go back to the video that we have on stitching different scales of stippling and remind yourself those steps. Maybe review that block, mark that block again, and stitch it again for practice, and you'll kind of get that size, that scale into your hands, into your brain again, and you'll be able to apply it yourself. My name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Pick up your copy of the Building Blocks quilt pattern and learn how to piece and quilt with us through 42 beautiful quilt blocks. You can pick up your pattern at leahday.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.